So the way in which people talk about being lonely and the way that it affects them is that people say that they use words like lost or anxious or forgotten and fearful, and what people say is that those feelings, which really cut very, very deep, make it hard for people to kind of keep up with their normal daily social life. People lose confidence. People will often kind of dwell or really kind of overthink about the different social interactions that they've had, and that they will often kind of imagine that things were much worse than they were, or that things might have gone wrong when they haven't. And so it can be a real kind of downward spiral which people find it hard to get out of.
When thinking about older people and the issues they face in isolation, we kind of have to think on both levels. Think on the level of kind of how it might feel emotionally, but also how it might actually have a very physical impact. And then that physical impact will then kind of increase the likelihood of isolation and loneliness, because they may not be able to access things as readily as they did before, or they may not feel they're able to access things as readily as they did before. So it's just about being aware of all the different things that might happen from staying indoors or kind of not connecting and having a conversation with others as you did once before.
So there are a number of different types of causes. So some of them can be quite kind of individual, and so some of them are about different people's psychology. Some people find it easier to kind of shake off feelings of loneliness and move on, but other people, it might also be things which are quite immediate and quite close to you. So the biggest single risk factor for being lonely is having a recent bereavement, because you can well imagine that if you've lost your partner, then that is just always going to be something that is going to be really, really difficult, and can often mean that people can get kind of stuck in feelings of loneliness. But there are other risk factors like becoming frail or disabled, and also that how you feel about and the kind of community that you have around you can make a difference. And again, living alone can make it much more likely that someone can become lonely.
Well, to tell you the truth, since I moved into this block of flats, I am more lonely than I was when I lived just over the road down there. I lived in a little flat, but I could sit outside and people go by and you could talk. But in this flat now, I've been here since 2015, and I think I've seen my neighbour 6 times in all this time. But her son is all right. If he sees me out, he'll carry me shopping and everything. But I do it. And Sunday is the longest day of the week, because I don't seem to get many visitors on a Sunday. I do get upset and I do have a little cry at times, but I'm getting used to it now, but no.
Well, when you're isolated, it's a very bad thing. Especially being on your own, you have nowhere to talk to, nobody to explain your feelings. It's very, very hard, very hard. And I'm on my own. Since I lost my wife, I'm on my own. So it's a very hard thing, really. Well, you feel as you sit there on your own, you are isolated. If you're on your own, you just sit there on your own, automatic you feel isolated. It's easy to, you have to be very strong, really. not to feel isolation. It's a very, very, very bad thing.
Isolation for me, it's been really hard. So I'm lucky because I can call out to my neighbours, but everybody ain't got neighbours, but still it's really hard because you're indoors, you've got to keep everything clean, you've got to get the routine going. If you run out of money, what happens? Who can help you? And this is where we get stuck. And this is where the depression comes. Being isolated, like being in prison, and you've got all these bills, you've got all the washing, you've got all the tidying up, and you've got no one coming in to help or support. When you're blind, you really need that support. And when you're working with children, individual children, you need mediators to sort out issues and conflicts. And when it's high tension, so isolation in the house, you know, sometimes you might not want to feed, you might not want to cook. Sometimes you get depressed, sometimes people might not want to wash anymore. It gets worse and worse, but you've got to be strong and you've got to just do everything. The routine, you just got to try and make that routine because of your memory goes. You've got to remember things each day. You know, you have to, in your own house, you've got to create your own things. Like, I've started doing artwork. I started doing other things, you know. I have to help the children to go out and do different things. It's been really difficult. I'm telling you, it's really hard without support.
If you are lonely and can't go out, can't have visitors, it's hard. It is hard. And it can play a lot on your mind and your thought, you know, because if you're just by yourself, you'll be thinking all different things. And it can lead to depression, you know, and even make you ill.
Yeah, well, actually, yeah, it was very, very bad. Because the fact that I lost my wife a year before, so, you know, I was sort of lonely from then. Because the children come around, but it's not the same. It was a sort of, I sort of tried to live with it because the first year, losing her, I didn't want to be here. It was so sad, you know, because we were so much in love right to the last minute. The love is still there, you know. But, then this, pandemic come in. This is where it becomes even worse. So with the isolation and things like that, it make you depressed and feel of loneliness and things like that. It was not an easy thing to get out of it, you know. As I say, as a double whammy for me, losing my wife, where the two of us was together all the time for so much years, so it becomes lonely there. So I was lonely before the pandemic. I was just about getting out of it, and the pandemic started, so it pushed me right back into it. But I think I'd done good enough to be out of it now. I think people have to help themselves. You see, it's impossible sort of see someone to help you, because if you don't want to help yourself, don't care what one do to try to sort of help you, you cannot help. You have to want that help. And then what? You listen to people telling you what to do and what you're going wrong and things like that, and follow what that person is saying, you know. Because if you want helping at all, you have to change. You have to sort of go back. You want to go back to what you used to be. So you are the one who have to do it, because I say, is no one changed me. I changed myself. So I'm saying it's up to everyone. If you want to change, you can change. It's not impossible. You can change if you really want to. You know, so people must realize this.
You see, the word isolation, it means one thing, but there are so many things you feel when you're alone. During the time when we couldn't go out, of course, and we couldn't go to have our hair done or even wash our hair because we had no one to help us. And we needed even to go to the doctor. We couldn't do it. We had to have a verbal consultation, as we all did. I'm not saying about me, but most of us. And you push things aside. You have to, I suppose. And but maybe that's wrong. Maybe you've got to cope. Maybe you can't cope.
Definitely much worse, because even your friends couldn't come and visit you, and you couldn't go and visit anybody. And you are definitely, then it's much worse than usual. For nearly 2 years, how many, 18 months, it was very, very hard. You couldn't even go out to eat. You had to bring takeaway. You could go early in the morning to do a bit of shopping, and then you sit home all day long. It's very, very bad.
During the time of the shutdown epidemic, as you called it, I was isolated like everyone else, and it was worrying and distressing at times. I did feel lonely. I did feel anxious. Mostly because I was unable to go out as I used to be. So that make it even, and especially as well the families and friends I wasn't able to see as I used to. So it made me really sad. At times I was just like looking through the window, looking through the door, just to see if I see anyone. Even from my house where I live, it was definitely like a ghost town outside. I looked out a lot of times, keep looking to see if I see anyone, to make contact, but there was hardly anyone. It was just calm, no one. So at time, I wondered when we'll be able to get together again.
It's really damaged us for 3 years because routines are not the same anymore. Memories are gone. It's like, I can't explain it. It's a really numb feeling. It's a numb feeling of depression because it's like you're locked up in a prison, but with no support. But at least in the prison, you get food, they pay for your electric, they pay for your gas, and you're getting supported with your education, so your brain is being stimulated. And it's not nice when you're stuck in your house and you're feeling depressed and you feel disabled and you're crying out and you need help and you're running out of phone credits and like you're left on your own. But there's one good thing. They've got these food bank people sometimes, but they don't go to everyone's houses, and then you try and pay for your food bank, which is good.
I think this recent COVID-19 pandemic has offered us great insights into how easy it is to experience isolation and loneliness. A lot of people have been experiencing isolation and loneliness for many, many years prior to this period, and often in shame and not being able to have the conversation with others, maybe fearing that others won't understand. But this shared experience of lockdowns, of disconnect, can mean that we can have these conversations. We just have to be brave enough to ask and then continue the conversation. So it's a good place to start any conversation when thinking about isolation and loneliness in older people.
It's important to look out for these signs because people don't find it easy just to spontaneously volunteer that they feel lonely. Having said that, loneliness can happen to people who have got rich seeming social lives, and people can be quite happy having relatively isolated lives as well. So it'd be fair to say it's not the easiest thing to spot. But I think that you can look out for those kinds of risk factors, such as living alone or being bereaved, having recently moved, or becoming disabled. So if you know those types of things about them, then that gives you a clue that the chances of them being lonely are a good deal higher. But also you can also kind of listen to the ways in which people talk about their lives and way in which they might talk about their social interaction. So if it seems like that people are perhaps quite finding it hard to engage with other people or don't seem to be having very many social interactions, then, as I say, there's no perfect way of finding out, but that those are good things to look out for. And I think that there's always an amount of personal judgment in this, but asking can also be something that people actually be quite pleased to be able to have the permission to talk about feeling lonely and to talk about the things that they might do to be able to feel less lonely.
Things to look out for in a friend, a neighbour, a family member who you meet, which might suggest they're isolated and maybe lonely, is a change, some kind of change in their kind of mood, if they're feeling lower, more withdrawn, changes in kind of eating habits or sleeping habits, just some concerns around their general well-being. These are the kind of things to look out for. Once you see these things and you're concerned, I think it's important not to stop it there, and it's about having the conversation. Share that you're just a little bit worried or a little bit concerned, and prepare yourself that they might not be comfortable having the conversation. It has a lot of embarrassment around it, a lot of guilt maybe, and I think it's about then the role of you who's asking the question, who wants to open up this conversation, to normalise it, to make people feel safe, that they're okay sharing that with you. Once the conversation starts to keep going, you can start bringing in ideas around things that might be of interest, things that you know in the community, and things that you can help and support with to help them kind of get along on their way.
They got to try to meet somebody else, go someplace where you can meet people and talk about, your problem. But you want to talk to somebody who sort of will help you, or they probably need the same help as what you do.
I will tell them to try and join activities, try and get into workshops. If you don't know how to do the Zoom or the computer stuff, it's important that you talk to someone in the council, someone from your local authority, ask them where you can go.
Well, what I suggest, isolation too, you have to try and go out as much as you can, go to the park, get a bit of fresh air, shopping, and then it breaks it down. You only feel isolation when you come home, and then it starts. But try and go out and meet people is better instead of sitting on your own.
And it's looking forward to things, I think. You can't just sit and think, oh, what shall I do? Which you could do, it's so easy, it's so easy just to sit back and, oh, I'm so fed up, my life isn't the same and I'm on my own. You've got to try hard. I'm 97 nearly, I've had some good years, and even looking back at your life, that's good, I think, when you're on your own.
It's easy to say if you are isolated and inside and can't get out, don't worry. But that's easy said than done. Because after all, you'll be still worried without contact with anyone. So try to be positive and look on the bright side, and don't give up. Don't give up. Try and keep hoping that someone will come to your aid. And life will change, for the better.
3 top tips for people who are feeling lonely would be, firstly, to notice these feelings. Secondly, to think about what you might like to do to kind of change that situation. And then finally, if you can, to think about any support that you might be eligible for, or that might be available to you to help you to reach out and do whatever it is that you would like to do to feel less lonely and to be more connected.
If I were to give 3 top tips for anyone experiencing isolation or loneliness. I think I break it down into ASK, ask. So A, for asking for help. It can feel really difficult, but if you recognise that I'm lonely and I'd like to talk to others and feel connected again, it has to start with a conversation, either from yourself, but ultimately people will be asking as well. So it's about finding those people that will ask you and having the conversation. It might feel embarrassing, it might feel alien, especially if it's not something that you're used to, but without the conversation, nothing will change. The second part is S for seeing you and who you are. So sometimes when things get a bit rough or we feel really low, we can disconnect from what's important to us, the things we used to love to do, but they slowly stopped. So ultimately it's about finding those things that give you routine, those things that give you joy and give you stimulation. And that can then hopefully have a positive impact on your health and well-being, and then you can take the next step of that once you build that stamina up again. The third point, K, is thinking about knowing that this is normal. Everybody experiences loneliness at some point in their life or another. I think it's about having the conversation to normalise it and to take away that stigma. That's everybody's responsibility to say, I'm lonely, that I need people in my life, that I can't do this all on my own. But until then, I think it's about understanding when you do kind of are hard on yourself or you're putting yourself down for feeling like this, you're not the only one. Everybody is thinking like this inside their heads, but no one's been brave enough to say it yet.